newly appointed department head at a mid-level tech firm. This isn't just a job, it's a mission. The place I'm taking over is the IT infrastructure division. It has a reputation for being a stagnant pond of male energy. My boss, Elio, who's a senior director, basically told me to shake things up. He used corporate language like modernize the culture and improve collaborative synergy. I knew what he really meant. Get rid of the old boys club mentality. Felt like a breath of fresh air finally being put in charge. My whole career, I've had to deal with these types of guys. The ones who think being good at their job gives them a pass to be socially inept. Day one, I walk into the office space. It's exactly as I pictured, dead silent except for the clicking of keyboards and the hum of servers. No chatter, no collaboration, just a bunch of guys staring at their screens. I see my team. There's Calvin, who seems a bit younger and eager. He gives me a nervous smile, potential ally. There's Oakley, the only other woman. She barely looks up. Disappointing, but I figure she's just been beaten down by the environment. And then there's Roman. He's tucked away in a corner, just radiating this aura of unapproachability. Doesn't even acknowledge me when I'm introduced. Just a slight nod, his eyes already flicking back to his monitor. I immediately flagged him in my mind. That's the one. That's the source of the rot. I schedule a team meeting for that afternoon. My goal is to lay down the new law, establish my presence. I talk about my vision for a more dynamic, communicative, and inclusive workplace. I use all the right terms. Psychological safety, open door policy, idea meritocracy. Most of the team nods along, probably just to get it over with. Calvin is nodding enthusiastically. Good. Oakley is doodling on a notepad. Roman is completely still, just staring at me with a blank expression. It's unnerving. It feels like he's analyzing me, judging me. Then I start discussing our current major project, a server migration. I outline my new, more aggressive timeline to show Elio I mean business. I finish my big speech feeling pretty good about it. I ask if there are any questions. The room is silent for a few seconds. Then Roman speaks for the first time. His voice is low and flat. No emotion. He says the proposed timeline doesn't account for the necessary security audits. He states that pushing it through like that will open up at least 3 major vulnerabilities. He finishes by saying it will also cause a system-wide slowdown and delay the final release, not speed it up. He doesn't say it like an opinion. He says it like he's reading a weather report. The air in the room just freezes. He wasn't offering feedback. He was telling me I was wrong in front of my entire team on my first day. A classic male power play, trying to undermine the new female boss. I keep my cool, of course. I thank him for his input and say that we need to embrace a more can-do attitude. I tell him I'll take his concerns under advisement. The meeting ends shortly after. The damage was done. He'd drawn his line in the sand. I knew then and there that he had to go. A few days later, I start my campaign. I call Roman into my office for a one-on-one. I want to document everything. I start by asking him how he's feeling about the new direction of the department. He just says, it's a change. No enthusiasm, no buy-in, just passive resistance. I tell him that his communication style in the meeting could be perceived as adversarial. I explain that we need to foster an environment where people feel safe to propose ideas without being immediately shut down. He looks at me, genuinely confused. He tells me he wasn't shutting anything down. He was just identifying the technical risks involved. He says his job is to ensure the integrity of the network. He's twisting my words, making it about the job and not about his attitude. This is textbook defensiveness. I make a note in my private file for him. Resistant to feedback, fails to grasp social dynamics of a team environment. The next week or so, I focus on building my relationship with Calvin. I praise his ideas in meetings, even the mediocre ones. I tell him I see a lot of leadership potential in him. He laps it up. I start assigning him to small tasks that would normally go to Roman, the senior tech. I frame it as a developmental opportunity for Calvin. Roman doesn't say a word. He just continues to do his work. His silence is louder than any argument. It's a constant passive challenge to my authority. I try to engage with Oakley too. I invite her for coffee, woman to woman. I ask her how she's found it, working in such a male-dominated space. She just shrugs and says, it's fine, the guys are okay, they mostly just keep to themselves. She's a lost cause. Suffering from some kind of internalized misogyny, probably thinks she has to act like one of the guys to survive. A major incident happens about a month into my tenure. A critical database server goes down late on a Friday night. It's an all-hands-on-deck emergency. I'm on the phone, trying to coordinate, but the technical details are over my head. Calvin is trying his best, but he's clearly out of his depth. Roman is the one who diagnoses the problem. He's on the remote call, his voice calm and steady, giving precise instructions. He ends up working through most of the night to fix it. By Saturday morning, the system is back online. A major crisis was averted. On Monday's team meeting, I make sure to control the narrative. I start by giving a big thank you to the entire team for their hard work over the weekend. I give a special shout out to Calvin for stepping up and showing real leadership during the crisis. I see Roman look up from his laptop for a split second. There's no anger in his eyes, nothing, just a blank, unreadable expression. Then he goes back to typing. He didn't get the credit, and he didn't care. Or worse, he knew he didn't need my validation. That was somehow more insulting than if he'd thrown a fit. It proves he doesn't see me as a real leader. My next move had to be more public. I needed to show not just the team, but my own boss, Elio, that Roman was a problem. An opportunity arises during a quarterly review meeting with Elio and the other department heads. I have to present my department's progress. I know Roman is the one who compiles all the performance metrics and uptime stats. The day before the meeting, I ask him for the data. He sends it in a meticulously organized spreadsheet. In my presentation slide, I deliberately change a few key numbers. I inflate our performance stats slightly, making our efficiency look better than it is. It's not a huge lie, just a bit of corporate polishing. I know Roman is professional to a fault. He wouldn't let incorrect data be presented. We're in the big meeting, my turn to present. I get to the slide with the fudge numbers. I pause. I see Roman, who is required to attend these meetings, shift in his seat. I knew he'd do it. He raises his hand. I pretend to be annoyed, but generously give him the floor. He very politely points out that the figures on the slide seem to be incorrect. He says the actual uptime was 99.8%, not 99.9%, and that the data processing speed had increased by 12%, not 15%. He's not accusatory, he's just correcting the record. This is my moment. I put on a concerned, slightly embarrassed expression. I turn to him and say something like, "Roman, I appreciate your eye for detail, but this is hardly the time or place. It undermines our team's unity when you publicly question my data." I then look at Elio and say, "My apologies. This is one of the team dynamic issues I've been working to resolve." Elio looks uncomfortable. The other managers are just staring. Roman's face finally shows a flicker of something. Surprise? Confusion? He just says, "I was only clarifying the data I provided." I shake my head sadly. "We'll discuss this offline." It was a masterpiece. In one move, I'd painted him as insubordinate, socially unaware, and a problem I was actively trying to manage. After that meeting, the atmosphere in the office got even colder. People started actively avoiding Roman. They saw he was on my bad side, and nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire. This was perfect. It isolated him. I used this to my advantage. I started talking to Calvin about how Roman's negative attitude was affecting team morale. I'd say things like, "It must be hard for you to innovate when Roman is always so critical." Calvin, eager to be my number two, would always agree. "Yeah, it's really tense," he'd say. "You can feel it." I asked him if he'd be willing to put some of his feelings in an email to me, just for my records, so I could address it with HR if needed. He agreed without hesitation. I now had a witness. My file on Roman was getting thicker. I documented everything. One time, he sent an email that was very direct and to the point about a technical issue. I wrote it up as, "Sends blunt, borderline hostile emails, lacks basic interpersonal skills." Another time, I organized a mandatory fun team-building lunch. Roman declined, saying he had a prior commitment. I documented it as, "Refuses to participate in team-building activities, actively works against creating a positive team culture." I started giving him impossible tasks with vague instructions. I'd send him an email asking him to optimize the back-end database. That's not a real task. It's a month-long project. He'd reply with a list of clarifying questions. What are the performance targets? What's the budget for new hardware? What's the acceptable downtime window? I would just ignore the email. A few days later, I'd ask him for a status update in a team meeting. He'd have to say he was still waiting for clarification from me. I'd then sigh and say that we need people who can take initiative and not wait to be spoon-fed instructions. Every interaction was a new entry in my file. I was building an airtight case of incompetence and insubordination. The irony was that his actual work performance was flawless. The systems he managed never went down. Every project he was on was completed on schedule, despite my interference. But performance isn't everything. Culture is what matters. And he was a cultural cancer. I felt like I was doing the right thing. I wasn't just getting rid of a difficult employee. I was fighting the same old toxic male archetype I'd been fighting my entire life. The quiet, arrogant type who thinks his technical skills make him superior. The kind who resents a woman being in charge. By around the end of that quarter, I decided I had enough. The file was thick. I had emails from Calvin. I had a documented pattern of behavior. I scheduled a meeting with the head of HR. I walked into her office, professional and concerned. I laid out my case. I didn't present it as a personal issue. I framed it as a manager trying to protect her team. I used all the keywords HR loves. I said Roman was creating a hostile work environment. I mentioned his passive-aggressive communication and refusal to integrate. I talked about the impact on team morale, citing my conversations with Calvin. I showed her my log of incidents, the public undermining in the meeting with Elio, the refusal to join team activities, the hostile emails. The HR manager was nodding along, her expression serious. I had her. She saw me as a proactive manager trying to solve a people problem. I told her I'd tried everything: one-on-one coaching, clear feedback, team-building exercises. I said that, unfortunately, I believed we were at the point where termination was the only option left. For the good of the department, she reviewed my file and Calvin's emails. She agreed that I had a strong case. She said that based on the documentation, his behavior was a clear violation of the company's code of conduct regarding a respectful workplace. She told me she would schedule the final meeting. It would be me, her, and Roman. I walked out of that office feeling a huge sense of victory. I had done it. I had followed the process perfectly. I had played the corporate game, and I had won. I was finally going to remove the one element that was holding my team back. I imagined the office without his silent, judgmental presence. It would be a better place, more collaborative, more vibrant. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend feeling relaxed for the first time in months. On Monday, I was walking on air. I gave Calvin a nod in the hallway, a little signal that our problem was about to be solved. He gave me a grateful smile. I saw Roman in the kitchen, making coffee. He looked at me, and for the first time, I thought I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear, it was pity? No, that couldn't be right. I was just projecting. He knew nothing. He was about to be fired, and he had no idea. I just smiled a tight, professional smile and walked away. The next day arrived, the day of the meeting. I put on my best power suit. I felt invincible. I walked into the HR conference room a few minutes early. The HR manager was already there, arranging some papers. We exchanged pleasantries. She was fully on my side. A minute later, the door opened and Roman walked in. He was holding a leather portfolio. He sat down opposite us. His expression was the same as always, calm, neutral. The HR manager started the meeting. She used the standard impersonal script. Roman, we've called you here today to discuss some ongoing performance and behavioral concerns. I then took over. This was my show. I calmly, methodically, and professionally laid out the case against him, just as I had for the HR manager before. I walked him through the incidents, his resistance to my new vision from day one, his pattern of unconstructive criticism, his public insubordination in front of a senior director, his refusal to engage with the team, his creation of a tense and uncomfortable work environment for his colleagues, like Calvin. I spoke for about 10 minutes, my voice never wavering. I concluded by saying that, due to this documented pattern, we had lost confidence in his ability to be a productive member of the team, and the company had decided to terminate his employment, effective immediately. I sat back, expecting him to argue, to deny it, to get angry. I was prepared for anything except what he did next. He didn't say a word. He just listened patiently until I was finished. The HR manager looked at him with a practiced, sympathetic expression. She asked, "Roman, do you have anything you'd like to say in response to this?" He finally looked up, making eye contact with me for a long moment. Then he turned to the HR manager. "Yes, I do," he said, his voice perfectly level. I anticipated this might be a possibility. He opened the leather portfolio he'd brought with him. My heart skipped a beat. What was that? I thought maybe he had performance reviews, emails from my predecessor praising his work, something easily dismissed. It wasn't that. He took out a small digital voice recorder and placed it on the table between us. My blood ran cold. He then said, "Words can be misremembered or taken out of context. So after the incident in the directors' meeting, where I was publicly reprimanded for providing accurate data, I felt it was necessary for my own safety to have a clear record of my interactions with my manager." He looked directly at me. "This device contains audio recordings of every one-on-one meeting, every performance review, and every private conversation we've had in your office for the last 3 months. He then turned back to the HR manager. "I'm sure if you listen to them, you'll get a very different picture of who was creating the hostile work environment." The silence in the room was absolute. I stared at the little black rectangle on the table. Every lie, every veiled threat, every bit of gaslighting, every time I twisted his words to build my case. It was all on there. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My mind was just a vortex of pure, unadulterated panic. My entire world just collapsed into that little black device on the table. The first coherent thought that broke through the static in my brain was damage control. I found my voice, but it came out strained, a full octave higher than usual. "You can't do that. That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent." I was grasping at straws, trying to find a rule, any rule, that would make this go away. Roman didn't even look at me. He kept his focus on the HR manager. She was the one who answered, her voice devoid of any of the sympathy she'd shown me just minutes earlier. Her tone was now clipped, official. "Our state is a one-party consent jurisdiction for recording conversations. Roman was a party to these conversations. Therefore, his recordings are legally admissible as a personal record." She didn't even need to look it up. She knew the law. My last hope evaporated. The HR manager looked at me, then at the recorder, then back at me. She said, "In light of this new information, we're going to have to suspend this meeting." She stood up. "Roman, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will need to take this device for review. You'll be contacted by HR with next steps. For now, you can return to your desk." He just nodded, pushed the recorder an inch further into the center of the table, stood up, and walked out of the room without a single backward glance. He left me there with her. The HR manager sat back down, her face like a stone mask. The friendly, supportive ally was gone. In her place was a corporate functionary. She told me, "You are being placed on paid administrative leave, effective immediately." She slid a pre-printed form across the table. "You are not to return to your desk. You are not to access the company network, email, or any other systems. You are not to have any contact with any employees of this company, especially the members of your team." She emphasized that last part. "An investigation will be conducted. You will be contacted when we have concluded our findings." I was speechless. I just stared at her. "Do you understand?" she asked, her voice sharp. I managed to nod. "Your building access has been revoked. Security will escort you out." It was the most humiliating moment of my life. A security guard, someone I'd probably passed in the hallway 100 times, was waiting for me outside the conference room. He didn't say a word, just walked me to the elevator, down to the lobby, and stood there as I walked out the front doors into the midday sun. My work bag was still in my office. My car keys were in my bag. I had to call a rideshare home, standing on the curb like a total outcast. The entire ride home, my mind was racing. I replayed every conversation with Roman in my head. Every time I'd pushed him. Every time I'd twisted his words. Every piece of condescending feedback I'd given him. I had been so sure, so confident in my own narrative. The idea that he had a perfect objective record of it all was terrifying. When I got home, the first thing I did was try to call Calvin. I needed to warn him. I needed to get our story straight. If he backed me up, it would be my word and his against a bunch of audio recordings that they probably couldn't even use anyway, right? My mind was still trying to find a loophole. His phone went straight to voicemail. I sent him a text. "Call me. Urgent." No reply. I tried again an hour later. Voicemail. By that evening, I knew. He was ghosting me. He was cutting me loose to save himself. The next 2 days were torture. I was trapped in my own apartment with nothing but my thoughts. No work emails to distract me, no meetings to run, just the echoing silence and the constant, replaying loop of my own arrogance. I tried to call Elio, my boss, on his personal cell. He picked up, but when he heard my voice, he cut me off. "I can't talk to you. This is an active HR investigation. Do not contact me again." He hung up. That was when I truly understood how alone I was. The company wasn't protecting me. It was protecting itself from me. Late in the week, maybe a Friday, I got an email from a woman I didn't know in HR. The subject line was mandatory follow-up meeting. It was scheduled for the following Monday morning at the corporate headquarters downtown, not my usual office building. My stomach was in knots all weekend. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep. I walked into that building on Monday feeling like I was on my way to my own execution. The meeting was in a different kind of conference room. It was much larger, more formal. The HR manager was there. With her was a man in a very expensive suit who introduced himself as the company's chief legal counsel. That was not a good sign. They didn't offer me coffee or water. They just told me to sit down. The lawyer started speaking. He informed me that they had completed their initial review of the evidence. This included the audio recordings provided by Roman, as well as interviews with other members of the IT department. He said, "We've listened to the recordings, all of them." He opened a file in front of him. "We found a disturbing pattern of behavior." He then proceeded to read my own words back to me. He quoted the first one-on-one meeting, where I told Roman his factual, technical feedback was adversarial. He quoted the meeting where I assigned him the vague task of optimizing the database, and then ignored his requests for clarification. He quoted my conversation where I accused him of creating a hostile environment for Oakley, despite him barely ever speaking to her. Hearing my own calculated, manipulative words read aloud in the sterile, emotionless voice of a lawyer was a uniquely horrifying experience. They weren't just my words anymore. They were evidence in a case against me. He then moved on to the interviews. "We spoke with Oakley," he said. She stated that Roman was quiet and professional, always helpful when she had a technical question, and that she had never once felt uncomfortable or threatened by him. In fact, she stated she felt more uncomfortable by your constant attempts to draw her into a conflict she had no interest in. That stung. The woman I thought was a victim of the patriarchy actually saw me as the problem. Then came the final nail in my coffin. "We also spoke at length with Calvin," the lawyer said, his eyes fixed on me. I braced myself. "Calvin admitted to coordinating with you to build a case for Roman's dismissal. He provided us with the emails where you prompted him to document his feelings about Roman's behavior. He stated that he felt he was under significant pressure from his direct supervisor, that's you, to create these documents, and that he feared for his own job security if he did not comply. A complete and total betrayal. He had thrown me under the bus, backed it up over me, and then driven it forward again for good measure." The lawyer closed his file. "The evidence is overwhelming," he said. "You engaged in a sustained and targeted campaign of harassment against an employee. You created false documentation. You attempted to coerce another employee into colluding with you. You have exposed this company to significant legal liability." The HR manager finally spoke. She slid another piece of paper across the table. It was a termination letter. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately for gross misconduct." She then slid a second, thicker document across. "This is a severance agreement. The company is prepared to offer you 2 weeks' pay, in exchange for which you will sign a non-disclosure agreement and a full release of all claims against the company and its employees." She paused. "If you do not sign it, you will receive nothing, and we will, of course, reserve all our legal rights. We strongly advise you to have a lawyer review it." I was fired for the very thing I had accused Roman of. The ultimate irony. I felt sick. I just took the papers, stood up, and walked out. There was nothing left to say. The weeks that followed were a blur. I hired a lawyer who told me I had no case and to just sign the severance agreement. So I did. I started looking for a new job, but the tech world is small. I never knew for sure, but I suspect I was blacklisted. I'd get through first or second round interviews, and then, suddenly, the company would go silent. My career, which I had built so carefully, was in ruins. One night, a few months later, I was doom-scrolling online, feeling a familiar mix of self-pity and rage. Out of morbid curiosity, I went to Glassdoor and looked up my old company. I was scrolling through the reviews, the usual stuff. Good work-life balance, management is out of touch. And then I saw it, a review posted about 2 months ago. It was long, and very detailed. It was titled, "Great Engineers, but be careful if you're a man." My blood turned to ice. The anonymous review laid out the entire story, but from his perspective. It described a new manager who came in with an agenda. It described how she targeted the most senior, quietest engineer. It described how she twisted his words, stole his credit, and publicly humiliated him. It described how she tried to get him fired on false pretenses. And it described how he had recorded everything to protect himself. The review didn't name me. It didn't have to. Anyone at the company would know exactly who it was about. The final paragraph of the review is what haunts me to this day. It was a piece of advice. My advice to any man working here, or any man in a corporate environment in general: document everything. Keep records of your work. Save your emails. If you find yourself in a situation where you feel you are being targeted by a manager with an ideological agenda, buy a voice recorder. It's cheap insurance. It might just save your career, because in the current year, your competence and hard work are not enough to protect you. You have to protect yourself. I closed my laptop. He hadn't just beaten me. He hadn't just gotten me fired. He had turned my story into a cautionary tale for his side. He took my crusade and made it into a lesson. And I was the punchline. I found out through the grapevine that Roman was offered my job as department head. He turned it down. Instead, he negotiated a new role for himself, a senior principal architect position. It came with a massive pay raise, a private office, and, most importantly, an explicit exemption from having to attend any meetings that weren't strictly technical. He had won. He got everything he wanted, not by playing the political games, not by fighting back loudly, but by being quiet, competent, and prepared. He just calmly weathered the storm I created, and then, at the very last moment, he showed everyone the receipts, and I was left with nothing.